Hi, welcome to the 9th edition of the Data Value Show. We'll be in double digits soon. Today we've got a great topic, adding value by reducing friction using DataOps. And who better to talk about that is Guy Adams from DataOps.live. So, hi Guy.
Hi Chris, thanks for having me.
No problem. Pleasure's all ours, should we say. So I probably, if anyone doesn't know who Guy is, he works for DataOps.live. Do you want to give a bit of an intro about your background maybe and what DataOps.live, if they haven't guessed by the name, do?
Yeah, so I mean, I can answer the two at the same time. So my background, I've been in the data world for 5 years, but prior to that, I spent 20 years building software development organizations, anywhere from sort of 6 to 300 people globally. So I spent a lot of time going through the agile DevOps CI/CD journey with various sized teams and organizations. Did that for about 20 years, but partway through that, I started getting into cloud infrastructure. And I got into that pretty early when it was all manual. And then I saw how the cloud infrastructure, cloud ops world learned from the software world, particularly in terms of things like how automation and orchestration work. When I came to the world of data a decade later, it was like going back in time. It was deja vu. What I saw was manual processes, lack of repeatability, lack of automated testing, incredibly long cycle times, and it was what I was used to in software 2 decades ago and what I was used to in cloud infrastructure a decade ago. And that was really the genesis of us, trying to define the space of data ops, was how do we take the benefits that the software world's enjoyed for 20 years and the cloud infrastructure world's enjoyed for a decade, and how do we bring it to the world of data? And we want to take the things that work well. We don't want to reinvent wheels where we don't have to.
Yep.
We want to identify just the things that are unique to data and solve for those problems.
Exactly. It's looking to the past to evolve for the future.
Absolutely.
is one of our strap lines we try to use. So I think let's frame this as well, because we've got the term friction in the title of this, and we've probably got different views in it, and I suppose all coming down to the same essence is friction slows you down. So if you take that, and internally at Leap we use the term friction as part of our assessments on data delivery, which obviously DataOps helps with. And we use it. It's friction is the time, complexity, and effort in performing an individual task. And then if you start to look at what task you're doing, and then look at the effort, it gives you a nice roadmap of when you should look to reduce the friction and which order you should look to do it. But I suppose that's in a purist sense. From your view, how would you define friction?
Well, I think that the time, complexity, and effort is perfect. We can't do a better definition than that. I think for me, when we look at the scope of friction in the context of data ops, it's how many different places that applies, how many different touch points, how many different components are there to that. And really, it's a lot wider than you think. Remember, people tend to jump and think about data ops as purely as a technological solution, but really much more fundamentally, it's a way of working. There are technological solutions, but it's a way of working. So if you think about the end to end, let's say, okay, we view friction as everything between a business user realizing they have a need and that need being met in production. And so you break that down, you say, there's a lot of things that people don't think about. The friction of requirement specification. How many times have we seen, a month's worth of work took 3 months to actually decide what the user wanted? We focus on optimizing the month. But what about the 3 months? That's a massive piece of friction, just requirement specification, test specification, solution design, development initiation. How many hours or days was spent just building the environment before the first person wrote their first line of code or configuration? The development process themselves, the fact that you've got context switching, you've got multiple people. How do multiple people work together? One of the most important ones for me, stakeholder review and iteration. It's one of the ones that I think people get wrong time and time again, is they think about agility as a development process, not as a process to get the stakeholders what they need. Yep. So, I get this specification, I lock myself away, I iterate through it lots and lots of times, and I go da-da, and I hand it over after a week's worth of work, and the stakeholder says, great, but that's not what I wanted at all. Yep. So iterating with the stakeholder, that is dramatically reducing the friction, because it's all about the friction to get the business user what they need. That might not be what they asked for. So, even once you finish the development, you've got testing, peer review, deploy to a dev environment, more testing, more peer review, deploy to a QA environment, test your rollback process, all the way up into production. And even then, are we finished when we get to production? Because actually, if you think about data ops, we focus on the development part of it, but what about the ops part of it? Even when we built a new feature, we put it out into the world. Is anybody using it? How are they using it? Who's using it? What frequency? It might be that actually someone wanted that for a particular purpose, and it's no longer needed. No one's used that for 6 months, and yet we're still maintaining it and patching it and deploying it. So there are literally tens, if not hundreds, of points in that end-to-end process where friction exists. And you're absolutely right. We can't solve all of them immediately. So that's where the maturity comes in. So when you've got to decide where to start is which of these are causing the biggest friction to the end-to-end process. There's a phrase in Agile. You follow the baton, not the runner. I don't care what the individual pieces are doing. I only care how fast the baton gets around the track.
Yeah, it's how you eat the elephant in bite-sized chunks.
Exactly.
And I think you touched on quite a few things there. And I just wrote a note a minute ago. It was team sport. I think data ops is a team sport,
100%.
And the team includes the business. And everyone. And if I was jumping on, I think this would be a big technical or how you technically solve it. You can I think it's very easy to technically solve something. It's actually getting that fitting to a process, because as technologists, sometimes we get to the stage where we try and force our solution onto the business. And it really is the wrong way around. The business should be giving us, this is how they work. We may be able to change, advise, optimize how they work, but it has to work. It has to be how they want to work. And I think the other thing that you touched on as well, and I think it's that evolution of the components or products in the modern data stack and how they've had to catch up. And we've been around this world quite a while, and the biggest blocker to DataOps being massively adopted at the beginning was all the technology we worked with just didn't work like code. And the code world, or the application world, it was very easy because all you were doing was, it was very hard. But it was with Java, it was with Python, it was with infrastructure code, but everything was code. The world of GUIs and separate repositories for proprietary code as it was being stored wasn't a common thing, but it was in that data world. So how have you seen? How have you, with obviously what you do as your company is, you had to look to see what products will work in a good way, and where they don't, you've had to compensate for that with maybe ways of working or some special sauce in your product. So so how have you seen that? How have you seen those products, that ecosystem change to fit to DataOps over time?
I certainly think that, you're absolutely right. When I first joined the data world, one of the big barriers was everything was built for people to use keyboards and mice to click on the screen. And that was the primary expected interface for everything. What we've seen is maturing, particularly many of the newer vendors in that space, and particularly many of the sort of more cloud native vendors in that space have come from a much more software centric world. And they have said, everything is configuration, everything is code. But at the end of the day, there are still a lot of platforms out there that don't do that. And a significant part of what we do, we're working on a massive project with a global organization at the moment for exactly that. They've got an enormous installation of a relatively, so use a traditional ingestion tool, and they want all of the benefits of Git version control and environment branching and all these things. But they've got a technology that doesn't support that. And so, a lot of what we do is say, okay, well, it's going to be an enormous exercise for you to, either for them to upgrade or for you to move away. How can we sort of fill some of those gaps? And it's not necessarily perfect every time, but, bringing some of those polyfill solutions to allow these tools all to interoperate together in a way that looks and feels pretty much like everything is sharing one repository, doing it the way that we would expect to from the software world. But the other thing to bear in mind is, you described it in the way that most people and I historically have thought about it, which is this is the data world over here and then the application world over there. But of course, those worlds are colliding together at an enormous speed.
I think the overlap is getting and quite it's good. I'm very happy about it. The overlap is getting bigger, I think, every year. Where I think that where data world was just that downstream project that you gave the requirements after you've already gone live of what we need to do for reporting, those have gone. And and you see now when projects are initiation, data is part of that. So I think you're right. I probably did try and keep those two worlds separate, but I think data ops, ML ops, all ops, coming into that consistent way of working with maybe different capabilities for each part of the journey. And I think that's the other thing that triggered what you were just saying there is, I don't think people understand how complex this ecosystem has got. And when I started, the data team was quite a small team. You pretty much knew all the technology that was going on within your own ecosystem. And with all of these SaaS products out there, marketing doing their own thing, some stealth IT or shadow IT happening, ML ops being done separately in its own area and not done as conjunction with DataOps. It's still very fragmented, and I think getting that, some advice out there, getting that view of where everything is as a starting point will actually assess where your friction is. I've worked in organizations where the ticket approach you mentioned earlier of just going off and just working your little bubble on the ticket, and I do think that unfortunately data teams had got into that mentality of, I've done my job because I've done the ticket. And the job's not done until the business is happy, and I'm going to use this, is getting value, and if Ian's listening, I don't know how many times I've had business value yet today, but you can keep count. So I have a running total of how many times I use the term, but I'm trying to cut it down. But the job isn't done until then. So
I think in that particular area, it's interesting because we're always looking for the golden bullet. We're always looking for the win-win, and that to me is absolutely one of those. It's life is usually a trade-off. If it's better for me, it's worse for somebody else. But that piece where if you can get the business and the data team, the data engineering team, work together into agile flow, the business wins. Because they get their feature. First of all, they don't have to specify it completely up front because nobody knows what they want on day one anyway. So they're just guessing. So it's going to be wrong. So they can get their feature specified a lot faster, which benefits them. The development team don't spend weeks and weeks and weeks or months building something that turns out not to be needed anyway. So, it is one of those true win-wins that if you start, come up with a simple requirement specification, start working on it and iterate, literally there's nobody loses out of that equation. Data teams get their job faster. They've got less wasted work. They've got less disappointment. The business gets their results faster, and they're not being asked to crystal ball what they might need. It really is one of the biggest changes you can make to the way the data teams and the business work together. Yeah,
and happier teams that actually know their value and where they fit into the bigger picture, and understanding that the things they do have consequences, and sometimes good and sometimes bad, but being accountable for your actions and rewarded for your actions as well is something that would definitely help with. I think we got our 4, but I think we've actually got into anything. Let's start the first one, and I think that's why not having automation is no longer an option.
It's funny. It's only in the data world would that even be a question. You would not go to a software conference or a cloud infrastructure conference or any sort of event and have this as a question, which just kind of shows that the data world is still in many ways playing catch up. But there are still some fantastic examples. You posted something I think a few days ago about Knight Capital Group. And this is just this is in the software world. It's a DevOps story rather than DataOps story, but the learnings are identical. They basically had a they had a testing process that was manual. They had a deployment process that was manual. Some human being on a particular minute did something a little bit wrong, and it cost them $400 million and essentially the bankruptcy of a very large trading company. And it was a 100% DevOps problem, and it was because things were being done manually. They didn't get done quite right, and one of the things that people always forget when they talk about automation, everybody always focuses on deployment. And it turned out that this problem, there was a deployment problem. The deployment went wrong. Someone didn't do something quite right, and no one picked up on it. But actually, the bigger problem was the rollback. When we talk about automation, there's automated ways of getting my changes out there, but just as important, if not more important, is how do I automatically bring that back, roll that back if something goes wrong? Because actually what happened in that particular case in that Capital Group is that they manually deployed it, and when they realized it was going wrong, they then manually tried to fix it, and they made it 10 times worse. That was actually what killed the company. That's what made it a $400 million, not a $40 million problem, was because in the process of manually trying to fix it, they made it catastrophically worse. So to me, the automation as a repeatable, reliable, sustainable process is just non-negotiable. People make mistakes. People make mistakes all the time. So there's a huge risk element and the governance element to it, but it's also back to friction. It takes time. It's laborious. It's time consuming. If you're doing it properly, you're doing it at least 3 times through 3 different environments to validate it. So it's very, very high friction. It's very, very expensive, and it's a very high risk, low governance way of working.
Yeah, and I mean, we shared the article, so I know exactly what you're referring to. And it was I was in awe when I was reading it and just thinking how quickly something out. I think it was in 45 minutes the company had lost 400 million. But the thing we went back, what we mentioned earlier about that data world and the business becoming closer and closer, even though it was a DevOps example. It's the same situation if you're doing a trading algorithm. The algorithm is using it, and this was more of an infrastructure and how the code came into it, a problem. But I think it's a real problem that can happen in the data world. The more we start becoming dependent on algorithms within our operational processing, the days of that data warehouse being sat down at the end, of the process and having a very no feedback loop into the main operation, it's gone now. It is embedded into your organization and will be even more going forward.
And I think your whole podcast, the concept of data value, but if the more and more you'll be a victim of, if you don't do this right, you'll be a victim of your own success. The more valuable you make the data, by definition, the bigger problem you're going to have when that goes wrong.
Exactly. Yep. You have more of a dependency on it. So you need to start, and hence the thing why it's no longer an optional. It should be a foundational piece. And if you haven't got it already, and I think I have this other thing that we're talking about with Matt at the moment. It's competitive advantage. So I've been defining the term business value, and I think the current one we're going with is an evidenceable positive impact on your business performance. So if you can make sure that whatever you're doing is helping your business performance, and one of those things is competitive advantage, and it's very hard to put a number on it. But if you look at the companies now that are the top performing companies, it's because they all had competitive advantage. So there's a longevity aspect of your organization, of it staying relevant, staying agile, staying ahead of your competition. And you can't do that unless you can react quick. You can't react quick unless you know what to do if you need to react. If you don't know what to do because you haven't got it mapped out, you probably won't do it because you're too risk averse. So all those things compound together is affecting your competitive advantage, which in the long run will affect your share price, and maybe your bonuses if you're the top, and your jobs if you're just part of the workforce. So everyone's interest, even if you're just in a little data team and you haven't got the budget for it, there's a good justification, I think, for you to put a business case and say we need this before this happens. And I think your C-suite or your decision makers should start listening to that.
I think there's a really important point there, because we talk about competitive advantage. The number of companies where that competitive advantage is some amazing $1 trillion idea that just blows everyone else out of the water is relatively unusual. Very often it's a logical idea that most companies in your space are going to have. Then it becomes about time. So it's not that I've got an idea that no one else has got. It then becomes, well, hey, everyone's going to have this idea within the next month or two. How quickly can I bring that idea to bear on the market? So actually that time to deliver that idea in many cases is more important than the idea itself. And so when you come back to that, that's when it comes back to both the automation, because you think about all those steps we just talked about before. There's friction every one of those. Automation cuts through that like a knife. When we talk to customers about a DataOps cycle, And they say, you know, this is great, but, you know, if we were to do all the things you're talking about today, that's 3 months end to end. So I will tell you, guaranteed, our customers that are doing this well, they can get a hot fix from requirement into production in 3 hours, following that entire loop, including testing in multiple stages of environment. And guess what? That doesn't come unless you've automated pretty much everything that's possible to automate.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. One of the metrics we're looking at trying to define is, you know, what is the definition of competitive advantage? You know, and breaking that down. I think what you just said there is an excellent example of having competitive advantage. How long it takes you to release a new feature or change, and also how often they have issues. So you could start to go on to the old metadata, and you know, we start analyzing the data that's coming off our data is now going to give us that competitive advantage as well. And DataOps gives you that as well, because without that glue, that overarching orchestration and deployment and management of your end-to-end code, yeah, you're not going to be able to achieve that delivery quickly, easy, regular, consistent. Yeah, we've got some questions, and I'm gonna stick some of them up before we go on to the next one. So I think a common one is it. How do you think about DataOps in the context of Conway's law?
Don't know, to be honest. It's I don't think it applies to data anything like as much as it does to kind of software systems. The communication structure, to the organizational structure, certainly historically within data teams has been quite a bit more centralized. I mean, that's something that that we see breaking significantly. So the process communication that you talk about in a computer system doesn't really have the same relevancy in data, but what does is the organizational structure within the business. So certainly as we see things decentralizing, that is absolutely feeding back into the actual design and structure of the data and data products themselves, and in a very, very positive way. If you've got one single team that's doing everything, they're going to do it in the most efficient way to get to the end point, but without really thinking too much about everything in between. Whereas once you start saying, okay, well, I've got 5 different lines of business. Each line of business is responsible for their own data or data products, which maybe we'll come on to in a minute, because the data product component it's very, very hard to talk about this without starting to talk about data products. But at that point, you absolutely start saying, actually, the structure of my data now does follow the structure of my business, and there's a very good reason for that, and it just comes down to ownership. At the end of the day, the biggest shift we're seeing in terms of that decentralization is the people that are responsible for the data are the people that actually own that data, not some central engineering team who are communicating with the domain experts and the owners backwards and forwards over email.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And exactly what I was going to get to with it really is that I think historically, which leads on to the next question, I think it's from the same person. So why are we so far behind? I think it's because organizations haven't been structured in a way that has adopted the data capability and go back to that thing and say the data products or data product mentality. Because I know we got Dan Tooney on in a minute, and he's listening as well. And I know he's big on this data products, and I think there's a topic on that I think he'll be interested in as well when we get onto that. But yeah, I think that's the reason is that the companies, the data team and the business have been two separate systems, have been designed aligned to the capturing of data. I think now that we're monetizing or getting value out of the actual data itself, which is becoming another business value channel of using that data. Then I think the organizations are starting to fit back to that ownership is key, and the ownership, which comes back down to you're owning the data, or you're owning a product that is using the data as well. So you're actually owning the full end to end. Data is just one piece of the overall puzzle. So
I think it is just worth mentioning, because I'm the first person to be accused of sort of sometimes giving data teams a hard time as why they're not as advanced as software teams think. But to cut data teams slack, a lot of this was not their choice. A lot of the time, data teams were trying to do this, but there were some significant technological barriers. When I was running software teams, we were running Kubernetes clusters in the clouds, but yet our databases were on-prem, filled with with racks and racks of servers. Your ability to in an agile way spin up a new environment when you've got to install a new rack and 25 servers is pretty limited. So there were significant technical barriers, and it's only really with kind of cloud data the advent of cloud data platforms has really been one of the catalysts to allow true data ops to happen, is because they've just solved some of those there's fundamentally the elasticity, the separation storage compute, the concepts like zero copy clone, where I can just have a development environment in 5 seconds that looks just like production. Those things, if not absolutely required, certainly made getting to a true data ops approach dramatically easier.
Yeah, I agree. So I think we've come to the conclusion. I think we're all agreed that automation is no longer an option. So we've got the tick box on that. And we will come to products. I think that's the next one, which actually let's swap it around. I think it's a natural flow to go to products then. So where data ops meets data products. And I don't want to take away too much, because we're talking about this in Big Data London. So we'll make sure that we don't give away all of the topics we'll talk about there. But what's your view on that, Guy?
Yeah, so I think as you said, we're launching the data products for dummies at Big Data London. So we've got to keep some of the stuff in there. But it's I always bring my analogies back to the software world, because it's the one I always 80-85% of our answers lie there. So if we think about reword this question in a software way, where does DataOps meet software products? Well, a software product, being a modern software product like a microservice, we define it as a thing, and it has a whole set of characteristics. It's atomic. It does one thing and one thing well. It has well-defined interfaces and contracts and backwards compatibility, and so on and so on and so on. And all defined as code, all automated. That's the thing. That's the what. DevOps is the how. DevOps is the how I build it, how I test it, how I deploy it, how I monitor it, how I upgrade it, how I do multi-versioning support on it. So we reword that question back to data. Data products are the what. Data products are the thing that I'm building. They're the result. They're the why we exist. Data ops is not a why. I don't do data ops because data ops. I do data ops because data products.
Yeah. I think that's go back to the thing we said about the foundational piece. It's a facilitator to create something. I think I've talked about this as well about data teams. Data teams, we're here to serve the CEO, and the business. So what we're providing is the ability for them to productize our data in whatever means that is. And I think this is where I have coming from that retail world of working at supermarkets, things like that. I always talk of products. Think of that as the SKU. And everyone goes back down to okay, if a PIM, product information management system, it has a SKU. It's an item. It has a description. It can go on your invoice. And I know there's two schools of thoughts on this. And if I'm at my purist hat, I'll put my purist hat on and say it ain't a product until it's got a SKU. And if you're selling something internally, it coming on an invoice, then it's definitely a product. But I think there is a grey area of what's in between that. And I think that's where the product mentality, a product way of thinking, a product way of working fits nicely, even if it doesn't go and have a SKU at the end on that you're actually selling it. But if you do that, and I'm going to say this again, it needs to link to some value. It's performing some activity that can be monitored, gauged, and making sure that it's worth the time and effort it's doing, or that it's used to perform it. Which goes down to that friction thing again, doesn't it? Is that how often you're performing an activity. So I don't want us to spend too much time on the product thing, because we know we've got another session, a couple of sessions coming up on that. But I think it's safe to say we're both in agreement that having data ops capability will much improve your ability to deliver in a data product mentality, or actually deliver a data product with a SKU. That's good. We got Sonny on board. Hi, Sonny. How you doing? He's got a few questions there, so let's see. Okay, he's got one here, and I'll be yeah. So, it's a tough one. We get some tough questions here today. So, how are NLP and LLQ helping or hurting data products?
It's a good one. I mean, no one, I don't think, is going to argue that, a lot of the, natural language work we're seeing is the future, or a big part of the future. But in the same way, in the very early days, I was tempted to sort of, consign some of this stuff to the bin of blockchain, where everyone did blockchain because blockchain, not and people say, well, why am I doing it? Well, because everyone else is doing it. So, well, that's not a good reason. I don't think this is the case. I think this is very, very different. But I think that the same basic question has got to be asked: is why am I doing this? What problem does this solve that I can't solve in another way today? Because let's not kid ourselves that there are that's still a very new nascent area. There's a lot of extra work, a lot of extra complexity. There's amazing technologies coming on stream that abstract that all the time. So yeah, I think it will absolutely in some very specific cases in the short term, and I think in a much wider set of use cases in the medium long term, it will help data product.
Yep.
But my kind of note here would be just caution: don't run off and try and do something because it's cool and all your friends are doing it. Friends don't let friends do drugs. It's think about why you're doing it, and if there's a really good reason, absolutely go for it. Yeah. But don't try and jump on the bandwagon because it's the next cool thing.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that last comment. If there's a good use case for it, then do it. And I think it's actually making sure they're not doing it for the sake of it, and and making sure that it fits a requirement. It's like, if every problem you've got, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, every problem's a nail. So just because it's the coolest thing, don't go and try and use it for something it's not best suited for. Maybe a good old Boolean-based business rule approach with a case statement is good enough, because you've got to train this thing, and if you can already give it the context of what you're training about very easily with a business rule, it's probably best to just do it with the business rule.
The one thing I would put in here is a little bit of a pitch for the concept of hackathons, because I'm very passionate about this, because most teams tend to work in, we talked about the machine. It's the requirement, it's the execution, requirement execution. It's very rare that teams take them, and by teams I mean including the business, take themselves at that and say, what if? And we did an exercise a few months ago with a customer, and we had people from various technical teams, but we had business stakeholders in every one of those hackathon teams. And their job was not to solve existing business problems. Their job was to take a step back and say, what data do we have? What capabilities do we have? What business problems do we have? And let's just think big. And that's where I think a lot of this natural language stuff really has a play, because the flip side of this coin is the business is still thinking in a very constrained way. We've trained the business for years to, whether they're aware of it or not, to think about constraints about, well, this is what I can express in SQL, therefore this is what you can get in your dashboards, therefore da-da-da. And the business users have been conditioned to think that way. So whilst it may not be a foundation of a lot of data products in production today, getting the business users to start thinking, how could I use this in fundamentally different ways, not to necessarily take a problem we're solving today, but to solve completely new problems that were totally impractical before. That's an enormous area. And to me, the best way to start that is get a few people together, put them in a room, get them a bunch of pizza and say, go to town. And you'll be amazed what you get out of it.
I totally agree. And I think it's solving problems that didn't even know that existed as well. Because you get those people there, and they go, oh, I didn't know that caused a problem. I didn't know I could get that a different way. I didn't know you still sent that because I don't use it. Yep. And getting all the people that are involved in an end-to-end process. I think you mentioned earlier about you pushing the problem. Sometimes you just push the problem somewhere else. And I think we have done that a lot in the industry of, let's solve this here, and all we're doing is pushing the problem elsewhere. I've got one more on this product. I think we've got Russell. Hi, Russ. Let's show his one. Hopefully we're seeing him in Big Data London next week. He should be about. So I think this goes back down to, is it a product if it doesn't sell or otherwise bring value? And I'll give you one view on this before I go over to yourself. And I've already discussed that. I think a product mentality is great, even if it doesn't have a SKU. So, but I think the other one is bringing values. I think some people, when you build a product, your intention is it's going to provide value. I think when it doesn't become a product anymore is when you've evidenced that it hasn't worked, or hopefully evidence it has worked. If there's something's been running for a while and it doesn't have the longevity to provide value in the long run, then I think it intended to be one. Then it's just become R&D. So it's not a problem with that, because you'll learn from that and take something else. But I think intention is. I think the intent is, as long as the intended it's adding value, I think it could be a product. Whether it does, I think that will decide whether it just gets downgraded to just some failed R&D.
Yeah, I think that you've used the term a few times, which I think is a critical one: product mentality, product thinking. And one of the biggest differences between data projects was someone go away and build this. I've built it. Let's move on. A data product mentality. It means everything is a managed entity. It has a life cycle, and you're constantly asking questions like, is this still a thing we need? Does the value it provided a year ago? Absolutely, that's why we built it. But are enough people using it to justify its maintenance costs, things like that? So in the old world, the ROI and the value was done up front, and the decision was made: do we build it or not? And then everybody moved on to something else. With a product mentality, a product owner is constantly evaluating that. And at the end of the day, everything has to end sometime. In 100, nothing we're building today is going to be here in 100 years. So whether we like it or not, everything we're building is going to have an end of life. Yeah. But if you think about it in a product mentality way, that just becomes part of your way of doing business.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing popped in as you're saying that. It's having, and I put Dan's one up here as well. It's a great comment, really, and it's having that product mentality. And if you start thinking about product mentality, you're less emotionally attached to, oh, what is it? Oh, it's Fivetran, Snowflake, and something. Okay, well, that's not what it is. It is, that's what we've used to deliver the product. And with technology changes and things like that, you can swap things out because you should be emotionally attached to your product, not emotionally attached to the technology, and that's driving that. So
I think there's another important point here, and it's really down to that definition of value. I think, and I know in the past you've been hesitant to use monetization because it's a very kind of narrow definition of value. The example I would use is this: you consider a massive, well-respected infrastructure giant like Amazon. Amazon or Amazon Web Services in particular have thousands and thousands of products, software products that are built as products, managed as products, life cycles products that you and I will never see, because they exist behind the scenes to support the things that we do see. So value doesn't mean that my customers are necessarily interacting with it and using it. If I'm building an audit service or a logging service or something like that sits behind lots of other things, my customers are other product teams.
Yes.
And I'm delivering value to them. That allows them to value customers. So we've got to think a little bit about this definition of value. We have this very narrow defined thing that the users of my dashboard, they're the only ones that get the value. I think we've moved beyond that world now. And certainly as we scale, you end up absolutely having to have these core kind of infrastructural pieces, these reusable pieces that on their own may not face my consumers, but absolutely underpin their force multipliers. Me doing one thing well here allows 23 other people to do their thing, which may be customer facing, in a far better, more efficient way.
Yeah, and I think it's mapping that and actually knowing that these are the capabilities that I'm performing that all collectively provide you that ability to deliver something. And if as long as I think Amazon did so well with the way it carved up its infrastructure, because everything was doing a certain piece of the puzzle or helping that, or then servicing many pieces of the puzzle. But with that way of understanding, good old days of architecture, the diagrams, this is what we do, this is what you do, this is how it all links together. How you do that, I don't really care too much, but these are that old-fashioned word, requirements. This is what I need it to achieve. This is my RPO, RTO, SLAs, and all that stuff, which I do think is coming back with data contracts. I think that's another, I suppose, you'd say that data contracts are a component of a data product as such. They are facilitating that. You could even say that data contracts are actually selling something. Because if that data contract's used for you to select that data you're purchasing, it's your shop window for that data. That is that contract. So yeah, I think we're all in agreement that it's hard to define. Don't want to be purist on what you think of a product is, but I think product thinking is that key to this. And a product thinking needs to have a design. Design needs architecture pieces, an architecture design that's linked to the capabilities that perform in it. We're getting some good questions here today. I think I'll just say, I don't know if we're a data hero. I'm not actually an official data hero. Are you actually a proper data hero guy? Are you?
I am.
You are. Oh, okay. Look, that's why you weren't bothered by the questions. They were just bouncing off your cape then, weren't they? So I think that Ian was just shouting something here as well. Good old Ian. So how long it takes an organization to adopt a product way of thinking, and what influences that culture? Two great questions. And seeing I could jump in, but I'll let you go first, guy.
Well, if we're truly talking about an entire organization, then I think it's incredibly difficult, and it really has to come from the top. But that's actually not what we see happening most often. What we see most happening is, reword the question, how long it takes a data organization to adopt a product way of thinking? Because very often, not exclusively, but very often, it's a data team that's been thinking in a slightly older-fashioned way, working in an organization that many other parts of the organization are already doing it this way. So it's less about we're trying to convince people to do completely new things, more we're trying to convince this team over here or this part of the organization over here to actually kind of catch up with the rest of the organization. How you influence that?
It's the communication, I think.
It's a communication, and it's but at the end of the day, people are pretty selfish. It's answering the what's in it for me. I've always found to be critical. You can give me PowerPoint slides, you can give me this, you can send me on training courses, but until you can tell me how it's going to make my life easier or better, it's kind of in one ear and out the other. So often that starts with the right executive sponsor is very often a good way of driving this, but you've got to get it down to people why they should do this, why should they care.
I think it's having that company vision that's set, communicated, and everyone understanding how they are helping achieve that vision. Well, if you don't believe in that company vision, you probably shouldn't work for that company, because you probably should have done that as part of your research of who you work with. Mind you, I think if I did a history of all the companies I'd worked for, maybe I would have chosen all of them if I'd read their vision statement at the beginning. So I think it does start from that vision statement, and then being able to communicate that down to everyone. And that what's in it for me thing as well is, it should be that if you achieve that vision, you get your bonus, as an organization, as a company, you get the pay rise, or we have competitive advantage, we don't go bust. So I think all those things collectively, can help influence that culture and that product way of thinking. But Rome wasn't built overnight, as they say. So I think we're going to get onto our third bullet now. We talked about data ops and data products, and I do want to see if we can get on the future. We got the common pitfalls. I think we've touched on some of these, so I'll try and time. It's for once we had so much to talk about. We probably got another hour, so I'll try and make sure we get everything covered. So, what have you seen as the major pitfalls of adopting data ops to date?
I think certainly underestimating the challenge. The data ops space is not yet well understood, and the challenge, the approach say, engineer X has cobbled something together on their laptop in 2 weeks, and that will stand this enterprise, it will put them in good standing for the next 5 years or whatever. There is a lot of complexity to this, and trying to cobble together solutions, trying to reinvent wheels that have already been solved, is a very, very expensive way of doing it. And a pretty significant subset of our customers come to us having tried to do this and failed with enormous teams and budgets and things. So underestimating the problem is one. I think starting too late. if you go to the software world and say, right, well, this is where we're going to do it, team. We're going to build the first version of our product, and then we're going to implement DevOps and CI/CD. They will laugh you out of the room. You have zero credibility. The first thing you do on any software project is not write a line of code. It's you set up your development environment, you set up your Git repository, you set up your CI/CD. That's day one, and then you start thinking about writing some code. But too many people in the data world let's set up some tables, some infrastructures and views, get some import things going, and then we'll start thinking about the automation, the orchestration, the infrastructure management a bit later. And can it be done? Yes. But you're just inviting a world of pain and a world of hurt. In fact, we're just working on a video with one of our customers, exactly this topic, where they just say, we are so glad that we did this on day one, because these are all the benefits we got. And if the quote from the guy I interviewed, we said, I just can't conceive how anyone could even manage this. My life would be hell if I waited 6 months before I did this. So starting too late is a big one.
Yeah.
Being too focused on the technology. Mm-hmm. Yes. There is an enormous technological component to this, but as we've seen from some of the other discussions, the product mind thinking, DataOps at its heart is a way of working. You can throw all the technology in the world you like at it, and it'll make no difference. The argument I use is you could take the best DevOps tools available in the world today, time travel back 20 years ago and give them to me, and they would have meant nothing. Mm-hmm. Because every part of our thinking, every part of the way we worked was built around waterfall. So just throwing tools at the problem is never going to change things. And I think the last one, and this gets me every time, people come to me and say, look, we're absolutely, we want to be agile, we want to be fast, we want to be iterative. So let's write a 9-month project plan to deploy DataOps. You just put the biggest contradiction in the same sentence. You want to be agile and iterative about how you build everything, and yet you want this enormous monolithic way of adopting this new approach. You should be agile in everything. Your process to adopting DataOps should be, let's spend 2 weeks doing something and see what we get to, and let's examine the results of that, and let's do another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks. So trying to say let's build this perfect thing, let's train 200 people, let's get all this stuff, and then we'll roll it out and we'll declare done. Again, it can be done, but it's just fundamentally missing the point. You're teaching the wrong skills, the wrong way of thinking. You say, look, let's do what is the smallest, the minimum viable product, what is the smallest valuable thing we can build to show people how this works, and then let's just improve on that and iterate on it.
I like that approach. And something, an article we were writing as part of the book, which was, how to create that FOMO experience in your organization. Yeah. So if you do something for them, your best salesperson is someone, the marketing team. My God, those guys there, they've just automated stuff. I want to change. I get it next day now. And they're like, oh, why don't I get that? So, it's trying to find business vehicles, opportunities, small ones that can adopt that, provide that value and then increase adoption, because people have seen that it's helped others and they want the same experience.
Nothing breeds success like success.
No, exactly. All right, so I got any more on that one? I think we've got two others. We want to do maybe the future of it, but I think the last one I've got. Let's have a look here. We got, I think this is an interesting one. I'd like your views, and I've got some as well. But the rise of orchestration tools and orchestration, I think, has moved more to what it was back when it was just Airflow as a DAG, and what people think of orchestration now. And and DataOps, it's bigger than that. But it is where do you see the differences and where you see the overlap between the two?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. To me, sort of the term overlap implies two things that sit at the same level that have some commonality. To me, it's a tiered architecture. You cannot have DataOps without orchestration. It's one of the most fundamental components of DataOps. So I think the first thing is, even within terms of orchestrators, you've got to be a little bit careful. It bothers me a little bit. It's a very overloaded term. There's a lot of technologies out there that say we are an orchestrator, and what they mean is we orchestrate our stuff. We orchestrate our jobs. To me, by definition, an orchestrator has to be pretty much universal. You have to be able to orchestrate pretty much anything. If all you're doing is orchestrating your own jobs, fine, that's a really useful thing. But please don't call yourself an orchestrator, at least at least caveat it. But the second piece is, even when we've got a true orchestrator, and you use Airflow as a great example, there's a big difference between an orchestrator that can do something and does do something. Yeah. So in Airflow can orchestrate absolutely anything in the world. but you will build that yourself.
Yep.
It's a framework, it's an engine, and you come along and say, right, I've got 15 tools. I'm going to have to teach Airflow to talk 15 different languages, to kick stuff off and to collect metadata and to do security and all those other things. So to me, one of the big differences between an orchestrator as a vanilla thing and a DataOps platform is in a DataOps platform, when a DataOps platform says, I support X technology, doesn't mean that I can do it. It means it's built. It means that you don't write 200 lines of code to teach it to the language. You populate 4 variables and say, go do this. And that integration work is done for you. So it's a big difference is a generic orchestrator that can do anything, but out the box does nothing, versus a DataOps platform, which a DataOps platform is never going to know how to talk to a Cisco router or a Juniper thing or a CRM. But what it has been taught to do is talk to all of the tools in the data ecosystem so that they can come together. And then it's simply about scope. Underneath this sort of banner of DataOps, yes, you've got orchestration and you've got automation and you've got version control and multi-developer access and full development environments and native data product support. So it's kind of asking what's the difference between orchestration and DataOps. It's kind of like saying what's the difference between a wheel and a car. It's, a car has a wheel. All cars have wheels. Not all wheels can become cars. One is very much a critical, but one component of the other.
Yep, I agree. And I think underneath what you orchestrate, you're orchestrating hopefully products or pipelines to make the products, and it goes out. And underneath that, you got the technology layer. I think that's a good way of framing it. It's a layered architecture of which DataOps is that overarching management of everything underneath it. Yeah. So we've got. So we'll come back to the question in a minute, but we got the extra bonus topic, and so I want to make sure that we had some of it, and it's what we see as the future of DataOps. So you've got probably a bit of a head start because you guys are actually working on stuff that I don't know about. So what do you see as the future? What do you see coming?
It's funny. I'm often asked both internally and externally to use my crystal ball. And actually, in a lot of ways, I actually have a really good one, because I'm watching the third development of a discipline. I watched it with DevOps, then I watched it with CloudOps, and you could draw a lot of parallels. And I actually have a kind of a graph I maintain internally. I use it sort of kickoffs and things like that, where I plot the curve, and this is how the DevOps industry matured and expanded. Then this is how the CloudOps industry matured. It started later, but actually it grew a little bit faster. Why did it grow faster? Because it had something to copy. It had something to be inspired by. It wasn't having to reinvent every wheel. And then we look at the curve for DataOps. And when I started out, it wasn't a curve because it only had 1 point, because it was year 0. But now we've got enough years that we can start seeing that curve. And what's happening is the same thing again, is that's growing even faster. So it's much smaller than the other two because it started much later. It's much more nascent, but it's actually growing relative to those other two at the same point in time, much faster. Why? Because there are so many more things to be inspired by, so many more playbooks that we can take and adapt. And so previously I would say, like, there's the gap between, for example, DevOps and DataOps used to be somewhere between 5 to 8 years. I'd say today it's more like 2 to 3. And in a year's time, it's probably not going to be much more than a year. They are converging very, very rapidly. And I will actually tell you, in some specific cases, having worked in both industries, I think actually some of the stuff that's happening in the DataOps world is now more advanced than the software equivalent. Just because some of those challenges are, in the data world, are so much bigger, we've had to spend so much more time solving them. So I think that's the first piece in terms of kind of crystal balling. Mm-hmm. But I actually think the big part of the future as we see it is related to what we've already talked about. It is data products. Yep. There are people that are using DevOps and CI/CD to build things that we wouldn't call sort of traditional software products, but there aren't many of them. Those two worlds converged, and I'm expecting in 2-3 years, 95% of our customers are going to say we use our DataOps platform to build data products, and that just becomes a sentence that that is a de facto standard. But in order to do that, there are some really as yet unsolved challenges. I mean, and the two that we've really been kind of scratching our noodles on over the last 6-9 months and kind of releasing functionality for now. The first one is backwards compatibility. You mentioned data contracts. Mm-hmm. We talked about the concept of you can have a product that doesn't face your consumers. It sits internally and it's a force multiplier for lots of other people. If that thing breaks, pretty bad things start to happen. It's not just I've got 23 consumers that are human beings. my consumers are 23 data products. Each one of those has 50 consumers. All of a sudden now, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people are have a problem if I have a problem. So once we start stringing data products together, once we start composing data products, having these data contracts, automating these data contracts, the testing of these data contracts, the enforcement of the data contract is not going to be an option. It's going to be absolutely required. And there will be horror stories, like the one we talked about earlier, where people didn't do it, and many millions of dollars was cost because one change here slipped out into the world, and everything that depended on it broke.
I think you're right. It's that old days of compiling a data product where all the components need it. I need 1.1 of this, I need 1.5 of this, I need Java library this, I need this. Right, that I know is a bona fide testing. Oh, by the way, I need to do some backward compatibility if I go and change that component. What does it actually break to all the things out there? Oh, it only breaks that one because it's the only attribute to use there. Yeah, the more we start to productize data, the more we're going to need these methodologies to do it, because it's just going to be impossible to do it manually. We're as resources are the most expensive probably part of a project now. Obviously I say reassuringly expensive. But if you can, and we can be better used for other things, and that's it's not as if we think it's a valuable use of spending money on that. It's not. If you can look to have products or things that can simplify the way you do it, you're going to be more efficient, less friction.
Less friction.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other thing I wanted to ask was about ML ops. So, I can go as far as say LLM ops as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you see them just coming into the DataOps umbrella? Are they that different, or?
I think certainly in the long term, I think they will definitely converge. Whether one ends up becoming the parent of the other, whether they end up becoming the same thing. There are some significant differences.
Yeah.
Like if you look in the ML ops world, you have a whole thing about versioning my models, versioning all of the parameters that went with it, all of the traceability back to how this model was produced. The reason I think they will end up converging, though, is because at the end of the day, versioning my ML model independently from the data that built it is never ever going to quite make sense, because ultimately they are just two sides of the same coin. They're so inextricably linked. Versioning those two things together, testing them together, deploying them together, have an audit trail and a history of those things together. I think that's going to be the killer thing that forces convergence.
I think, and just as you're saying that, I was thinking that the only coupling of data to data ops now is making sure it volume tests and runs in an appropriate way, and it has the foreign key. It runs appropriately based on a representation of what it'll be in production, but it doesn't actually have to be exactly that data. You can use synthetic data. You can use a subset of it. Whereas I think in that world of the ML and LM, what it's been trained on, you want to know. So I'm going back to that ethics and explainability, of where that come from for evidencing it. And that'll be another thing that will come up. There'll be compliance and governance, regulatory things that, why did you make that decision? And you'd have to say, well, by the way, I'm going to have to give all of your code and versioning of what it was trained on to prove that you hadn't manipulated any decision that was being made, which will be a big thing as well. I mean, we're approaching on the hour, and we probably should talk about some other events that we got coming up together as well. So I know we're all at Big Data London. So do you want to give it what booth you're going to be on to anyone out there?
Off the top of my head, if I knew it, I would. But yeah, come and find us, DataOps.live. We're also doing a book signing, so we got a number of events going on. But come and meet us at the book signing. Myself and the other authors will be there. Have a drinks reception. Get a signed copy of Data Products for Dummies. The one thing I will say about the Data Products for Dummies book is there's a lot of books out there that reference data products. They're all very academic and kind of arm wavy and very loose and detailed. This is a very pragmatic guide. This is, if you want to get in the trenches and actually get stuck in and do this stuff, this is the book for you. So yeah, come and see us at the booth. Come along, get the copy of the free copy of the book. Come and get a signed copy.
And we're both on a panel there as well, aren't we?
And we are doing a panel together as well. Yeah, one of the keynote panels.
Yeah, and I've got one the evening there, and there's an event the day before. So look out on LinkedIn. There's too much to put in there, probably to capture all now. I've just quickly put on. So for next week, we've got Serge on SQL DBM, another author. So he's written his Snowflake data modeling book. So if everyone hasn't checked that out, check that out, as well as the DataOps book. You go for a mass book signing on this day. So you can get your book signed from Guy. You can get your book from Serge next week if you go to Big Data London. So yeah, so I think thank you everyone for joining the show. Massive thank you for Guy. It's been a lot of information. I think you speak as fast as me sometimes. So there was a lot going on there, and it's amazing we actually fit it all in an hour. Thanks for everyone that tuned in. To some regular faces or names there. So hope to see you at Big Data London, or Dan, I think you'll see at the Sigma event on Thursday in New York. So, okay, right. Well, that's a wrap, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much, Guy. Cheers.
Bye.